Hello everyone, this is Dr. Carlos Galera Zarco. Welcome to a new session in your module Build Asset Management. Today is our session number 15 and we are going to cover the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. Basically, these are the main objectives for this session. The first one is that you understand different steps in the PDCA cycle and that you understand which are the most common issues that you will face when applying this management tool. Finally, you will learn how to apply this continuous improvement tool in the build asset management. Well, in order to set the scene, to know what the PDCA framework is, you need to understand that this is basically a tool, a framework that was created for problem solving. But at the same time, this is a very good mechanism for continuous improvement and change implementation. In the literature, the PDCA is mainly recognized as a continuous improving tool. We can define the PDCA as a checklist composed of 4 stages that must go through to get from problem faced to problem solved. It means that through these 4 stages, we will identify the problems and we will find the solutions and the problem can be solved. In terms of historical context, this concept was originally created by Walter Sheward, who around 1939 discussed the concept of the continuous improvement cycle in his book Statistical Method from the Viewpoint of Quality Control. In some way, this Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle has been pretty connected with total quality management. However, it's in the 50s when Edwards Deming modified and popularized this cycle, introducing some changes and updating the cycle to what today is known as the Deming cycle or PDCA cycle. Now we are going to define any of the stages of the PDCA cycle. The first stage is the plan phase, and this is very important because we need to understand the reasons that lead people in an organization to implement any action. So we can distinguish 2 main sub-phases. The first one is to identify the problem, to focus on what, and the second one would be to analyze that problem by focusing on why. So when identifying the problem, we need to formulate a specific problem statement that clearly defines which are the key issues that define the problem. Also, we need to set clear and achievable goals and identify the different stakeholders that will be connected with this specific problem and develop the right communication channels. In the second sub-phase, analyzing the problem, we need to split the overall problem into individual processes to solve that problem, and we should be able to map these processes. Likewise, we need to understand which are the roots of the problem, which are the main causes, and formulate an hypothesis to verify or revise the original problem statement that we developed previously in the what phase. The second stage is the do phase, and here we can also distinguish 2 sub-phases: develop the solution and implement the solution. To develop solutions, we need to establish what is our success criteria. Later, we need to design our solution and gain the support from stakeholders in order to implement the chosen solution. In the second sub-phase, when we implement a solution, basically we will implement that solution on a trial or pilot basis. The third stage is check. And again, we can distinguish two sub-stages. Evaluate the results and achieve the desired goal. In the first one, we will gather and analyze the data on the solution. And based on this data, we can validate or reject our hypothesis. This is basically to check if the solution that we have implemented in a trial basis is working or not. The second sub-stage is about achieve the desired goal. So if the answer is yes, we can progress to the next stage. Otherwise, we should review our hypothesis, our designed solution, or even our problem statement in order to find the reasons why our implemented solution is not working. And the last phase in the cycle is act, which is basically to implement the full-scale solution. To do that, we need to identify which are the systematic changes and the training needs in order to progress towards a full implementation. Also, we will have to implement some monitoring plans in order to check that the solution that we are implementing is working in the long term. In addition, as part of the continuous improvement, which is implicit in this cycle, we need to look at other further improvement opportunities. Here you can see the overview for the cycle. We start with plan, then do, check, and here is the critical point. If after checking the solution we are achieving the goal, then we will act and will implement the full-scale solution. However, if after checking we are not achieving the goal, then we need to modify some parameters, we need to analyze what is wrong in the process and start again. And as I say, this is a cycle, so even if we are implementing the full solution at full scale, we need to continue in this process, checking new solutions, checking solutions for another problems, or trying to make improvements to the solution that we have already implemented. There are some typical problems and common issues that organizations face when trying to implement the PDCA cycle. The first ones are the technical factors, and they are pretty connected with the first stage, with the planning phase. We can distinguish between what we call big P DCA, which is basically over planning. The team in charge of this change get stuck in a planning cycle, basically because they are trying to confirm beliefs in planning instead of providing the model that should confirm these beliefs in the check phase. In the opposite, we find the little p DCA, which is the under-planning. Basically here, we are missing experimental hypothesis. We cannot find the why. So in that case, things could work well or bad for reason beyond understanding, because we are not achieving knowledge of what work or not and why. The other factors that we can consider are the social factors. Mainly, they usually come from an inadequate support from top management, in a way that the resources are constrained and the people in charge is not training enough. So in that case, the PDCA usually begin and end at the do phase. It means that, as many other management processes, the PDCA needs from a strong top management support. Now we are going to explore how to apply the PDCA cycle in asset management. First of all, it's important that you know that the Plan, Do, Check, Act is the operating principle of the ISO 55001. This management model describes pretty good how the different complexities from asset management can be split into related parts. And although the model is simple in theory, this conceptual model is on the basis of the complex thinking about asset management. Here you have the diagram of the asset management concept model that shows 4 different processes as part of an ongoing cycle for the improvement, which is the plan, do, check, act cycle that we have been describing before. As you can see here, each process is also embedded with a set of the principles which are defined in the ISO, which are output focus, capabilities, level of assurance, and learning organization. Well, now we are going to analyze how the different phases of the PDCA cycle can be applied in asset management. The first stage, plan, basically requires the identification of the need for a process change. So mainly we will have to focus on data that will indicate that a change is required. By analyzing this data, we can realize different problems. For example, that an industrial plant is very old, that there is a lack of maintenance for an asset or for a building, that there are poor operational instruction for a specific asset. So as you can see, the information can come from many different range of sources and include information from different stakeholders. In the do phase, when the change is made, it's going to be very important to keep documentation about the changes that we are implementing, because this information will turn to be critical both in case of success or failure of the new process, because in any case we need to understand the reasons why the implemented change is working or not. In the check phase is where we have to monitor and review the change that we have implemented. We need to measure the effectiveness of that change and if this has been executed according to our plan. In this phase is when we have to apply the data that we collected from the asset before and compare and contrast with the data that we are collecting now when the change has been made. So we can realize if we are achieving what we were expecting or not, and which would be our recommendation for top management. The act phase is the decisive step, and this must be based on all the information gathered in the previous 3 phases. So at that point we have to make the decision if we are going to adopt the change, if we are going to leave that idea, or if we are going to run the PDCA cycle again. Usually we will rely on data, but sometimes the problem is that we are not collecting or looking at the right data. Even in the case that we can measure and consider that the change is working, we should continue thinking on how to improve and refine the processes. Remember that this is a tool for continuous improvement of processes. Well, finally, we are going to explore the principles behind the model. In the asset management concept model, we can identify some principles which are embedded and connect with the PDCA model. These principles are: first one, the output focus, which basically aim to answer the question, what is the asset to be used for? The answer may not always be the obvious one. For example, because of the flexibility of use in buildings. The second one is capabilities. You already know that a fundamental principle of the ISO 55000 asset management standard is that the asset exists to provide value to the organization and its stakeholder. This seems pretty obvious, but note that the statement is about the value that the asset provides rather than its intrinsic value. So the question is, how can an asset value and the value it brings to an organization be different? Well, this is an important distinction to discern and depends on capability. And this is because the capability sometimes depends on external things too, like for example the operators with the right skills, the regular maintenance, the correct instruction manuals, etc. The third principle in the asset management concept model is the level of assurance. This is about risk, the certainty or uncertainty that when something happens to our physical asset, an adequate action will follow. Risk is a key concept in asset management that we will explore in further weeks, and some people even say that this is the most important of all. The final principle of the model is the one most affected by workplace culture and management style. This is also the most difficult principle to implement in an organization because it depends on people's attitudes. An organization whose members are always looking for a way to improve productivity, streamline a procedure, or increase the value of the product, they are creating together a learning organization. And finally, here you have the main conclusions for this session. The first one is that the PDCA cycle can be an effective and very quick method to implement continuous improvement in an organization. You must be aware that each step, plan, do, check, and act, are critical for a consistent implementation of successful process improvements. Also, you need to remember that the PDCA is the operating principle of the ISO 55001. Finally, regarding the application of the PDCA cycle to asset management, it's important that you understand that the diagram of the asset management concept model shows four processes as part of an ongoing cycle for improvement. And each of these processes is also embedded with a set of principles, which are the output focus, capabilities, level of assurance, and learning organization. So this is all from me now. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll see you in our synchronous session. Goodbye.